I want you to imagine something that sounds wonderful at first and becomes dangerous very quickly. Imagine you suddenly become rich. Maybe one investment explodes in value. Maybe a side business you started years ago finally takes off. Maybe you receive a large inheritance. Maybe you win the lottery. The mechanism does not matter as much as the outcome. You wake up and the financial facts of your life have changed yesterday. Money was something you had to chase today. Money is something you have to protect. Most people are not prepared for that transition. They think the problem is how to get rich. They do not realize that getting rich suddenly creates a completely different problem, which is how to stay rich, how to stay sane, how to keep your relationships intact, and how to prevent one event from turning into a long chain of bad decisions. I have seen this pattern many times in different forms. A person gets money before they get the principles needed to manage money. That is a dangerous sequence, because money is not just an asset. Money is an amplifier. It amplifies habits, incentives, weaknesses, relationships, envy, fear, generosity, ego, and stupidity. It does not make a person wise. It reveals whether the person had any wisdom before the money arrived. This is why when you suddenly become rich, the first rule is simple: tell no one. That sounds cold. It is not cold. It is protective. Privacy becomes your first asset. Before you buy anything, before you celebrate publicly, before you tell relatives, before you tell friends, before you post anything, before you start acting differently, you have to understand that public wealth attracts public claims. The moment people know you have money, the system around you changes. You become a target for requests, lawsuits, scams, blackmail, emotional pressure, business pitches, guilt, resentment, and social expectations. Some of these will come from strangers, some will come from people you love. That is the part most people are not emotionally ready for. They believe money will make life easier because it removes financial pressure. It can. But if it arrives without privacy and structure, it also creates a new kind of pressure. You are no longer just a person. You become an opportunity in other people's minds. That is why I like the concept of being stealth rich. Stealth rich means you have wealth, but you do not perform wealth. You do not advertise it. You do not use money as a way to prove that you have become important. You do not allow your ego to become your enemy. One of the clearest examples of the opposite path is Jack Whitaker, who won $14.9 million in the Powerball in 2002. At the time, it was the largest jackpot ever won by a single ticket. He did not remain private. He became known. He gave money to strangers who asked him for help. He gave millions to his church. He bought friends' cars and houses on the surface. That sounds generous. It sounds like a man with a good heart trying to share his good fortune. But wealth without boundaries is not generosity. It is exposure. His wife divorced him, friends abandoned him, his granddaughter, who was spoiled with money, tragically died from an overdose. He later said that being too much of a nice guy destroyed both his fortune and his family. That is not just a sad story, it is a principle. When money arrives suddenly, kindness without structure can become destruction. If you say yes to everyone, you train everyone to come back. If you become the family bank, you change the family. If you become known as the person with money, you attract people who do not want you, but want access to what you have. So the first move is not buying, it is silence. And the second move is structure. The only person you should tell early is a good attorney, and not just any attorney. You want someone who specializes in trusts, estate planning, and asset protection. The reason is simple. If you suddenly have wealth, you need legal architecture before social exposure. A trust can provide privacy. It can help with tax planning. It can help with estate planning. It can create rules around how money is held, distributed, protected, and transferred. It can separate your personal identity from the assets in ways that make you less vulnerable. Most people think legal planning is something rich people do after they become comfortable. That is backwards. Legal planning is part of how rich people stay comfortable. When wealth arrives suddenly, you need a system between you and the chaos. An attorney helps build that system. Then comes the question. Most people ask quickly, should I quit my job? A lot of people will tell you not to quit. I understand why. A job creates structure, routine, and normality. It prevents you from sitting around all day thinking about how to spend money. But I would put the principle slightly differently. If your job is making you miserable, quit that job. Do not quit working. That distinction matters. Work is not the same as employment. Employment is one form of work. Work is activity with purpose. Work gives life structure. It forces you to keep routines. It keeps your mind engaged. It prevents money from becoming your only project. Being rich and bored is a dangerous position. When people stop working entirely, they often begin looking for stimulation. They buy things, they start businesses they do not understand. They invest in ideas they would never have touched before. They take advice from people who suddenly appear helpful. They begin making decisions from boredom rather than principles. That is how a fortune starts leaking. A bored rich person is often more vulnerable than a disciplined middle-class person. If you suddenly become rich, keep your life as normal as possible for at least 6 months. That 6-month period matters. It gives your nervous system time to adjust. It lets the shock settle. It prevents impulse from becoming policy. It allows you to observe who changes around you. It allows you to find the right attorney, the right tax professional, and the right financial structure before you begin changing your lifestyle. Do not make permanent decisions in the emotional heat of new wealth. The mind needs time to recalibrate. This is true in markets. It is true in life. It is true in personal finance. Big changes create emotional volatility. When volatility is high, decision quality usually falls. So if you quit the job you hate, replace it with work that has meaning. Find something you enjoy, build something, learn something, help someone. Stay useful. The goal of wealth is not to become idle. The goal is to become free. Those are different things. Then you have to deal with debt. This seems obvious, but many newly wealthy people underestimate it. They think, I am rich now, so why worry about a few debts? That is a dangerous attitude. Debt is a contract. Contracts do not care how happy you feel after receiving money. Interest continues to compound, obligations continue to exist, and certain kinds of debt are financial poison. The first debts to eliminate are high-interest debts. Credit cards are the clearest example. They often charge 20 to 30% interest. If you're paying 25% interest on credit card debt, paying that debt off is like earning a 25% risk-free return. There are very few investments in the world that can match that. This is why high-interest debt should be treated as an emergency even after you become rich. Then there are personal loans and car loans. If the rates are high, they may also need to be cleared. Mortgages are more nuanced. Many people who suddenly become rich immediately want to pay off the house. Emotionally, I understand it. Owning your home free and clear creates a sense of security. But not all debt is the same. If a mortgage is cheap debt, say 2 or 3%, it may not be mathematically optimal to pay it off immediately if your capital can earn a higher after-tax return elsewhere at a reasonable level of risk. Then keeping the low-rate mortgage can make sense. But this depends on the person. Some people value peace of mind more than the spread between mortgage rates and investment returns. That is legitimate. Money decisions are not only about math, they are about psychology, stability, and avoiding behavioral mistakes. Still, the principle stands: eliminate destructive debt first. Think carefully about cheap debt. Do not treat all liabilities as equal. High-interest debt is a leak. Low-interest debt may be a tool, but a tool used without understanding becomes a weapon pointed at yourself. Once you clean up the debt, you make yourself a promise. Never go back into that cycle. Sudden wealth should be a reset button, not permission to repeat old behaviors at a larger scale. Then comes one of the hardest parts: friends and family. When you become rich, suddenly, some people close to you may feel entitled to a share. They may not say it directly, but they will feel it. In their minds, you did not earn it in the normal way, so they may see the money as partly available to them. They may ask for loans, they may bring you business ideas, they may ask for help with emergencies, they may tell you how much they have struggled, they may say, it is nothing to you now. That phrase is dangerous. When people say it is nothing to you, they are usually ignoring the fact that every dollar given away without structure affects the system you are trying to build. The fastest way to damage relationships is to lend money informally. A loan changes the relationship if they do not repay it. You become resentful. If you ask for it back, they become resentful. If they repay it late, the relationship becomes tense. If you forgive it, they may come back again. That is why I like a cleaner rule. Do not lend money to friends and family. If you want to help someone and you genuinely believe the need is real, give the money as a gift and assume you will never see it again. But attach one condition: they do not ask again. That may sound harsh. It is actually a way to protect the relationship, because if you become the emergency fund for everyone around you, you do not help them become responsible. You help them become dependent, and dependency creates resentment on both sides. There is a principle here. Help should not destroy the helper, and it should not weaken the person being helped. If your help removes consequences repeatedly, it may feel kind in the moment, but it can be harmful over time. Sometimes you have to be firm in order to be kind. The next rule is the most important financial rule after sudden wealth. Never spend the principal. Only spend the income. Most people who become rich fast still have a consumer mindset. They look at a large number in a bank account and immediately convert it into houses, cars, vacations, status, and comfort. They see money as something to spend. Wealthy people who stay wealthy see money as a machine. If you cut down the machine for firewood, you may feel warm for a little while, but then the machine is gone. The principle is the machine. The income is the fruit. If you spend the machine, the fruit stops. There is an example in the source story of a family that won the lottery and quickly bought a house worth more than $10 million, sports cars, and private school for their children. Within 2 years, the dream collapsed. The children were pulled out of private school, the cars were sold. The $10 million home was listed for $6.5 million after bad improvements and crushing debt forced the sale. That is not bad luck. That is a failure to understand the difference between capital and income. If you receive $5 million and immediately spend $4 million of it on a house, cars, and lifestyle, you may look rich, but you may have destroyed the cash producing base that would have made you free. That is the trap. People buy the appearance of wealth and lose the substance of wealth. So the next concept is your freedom figure. You calculate how much annual income you need to live the life you want, and then you multiply that number by 25. If you want $200,000 per year in income, multiplying by 25 means you need $5 million invested. This is based on the 4% withdrawal rule. The idea is that if your portfolio can support a 4% annual withdrawal, you can draw income without necessarily destroying the principal, assuming the portfolio is properly constructed and markets behave within reasonable long-term expectations. This is not a guarantee. No rule is a guarantee, but it is a useful framework because it forces you to translate lifestyle into capital requirements. If you want $100,000 per year, the freedom figure is $2.5 million. If you want $200,000 per year, the freedom figure is $5 million. If you want $400,000 per year, the freedom figure is $10 million. This calculation is sobering. It shows people that wealth is not just a lump sum. Wealth is an income-producing system. Even if you have not suddenly become rich, calculating your freedom figure is useful. It gives you a target. It tells you the size of the machine you need to build, but there is an important nuance. I personally would not want to depend mechanically on exactly 4%. I would want a margin of safety. I would want the portfolio to earn more than the withdrawal rate over time. I would want liquidity. I would want diversification. I would want to avoid forced selling in bad markets. The number is not the plan. The number is the starting point. Then you must build the portfolio. A normal bank account paying 0.5% will not support the rule of 25. You need an investment account. You need productive assets. You need a structure that can balance growth, stability, liquidity, and risk. Suppose you suddenly had $5 million at that point. The goal is not aggressive speculation. The goal is preservation first, growth second, and income as the bridge between the two. The source example uses a possible allocation, and I will keep the basic logic because it is a useful teaching structure. First, put $1 million into a low-cost total stock market index fund. A broad stock market fund owns many companies. It may include large businesses like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, and Alphabet, along with many others. The purpose of this part of the portfolio is long-term growth. Stocks are volatile. They can fall sharply. They can underperform for years. But over long periods, broad ownership of productive businesses has historically been one of the strongest ways to grow wealth. In the example, the total stock market portion is assumed to have averaged around 9% annually over the last 20 years, though future returns could be higher or lower. On $1 million, that would represent about $90,000 per year in average annual return if history repeated. But history does not owe you anything, so you do not build a plan that only works if the best conditions continue. Second, put $1 million into a low-cost total bond market index fund. A bond fund is a pool of loans to governments and companies. Instead of buying one bond, you own exposure to many. Bonds tend to provide more stability than stocks, though they also have risks, including interest rate risk, inflation risk, and credit risk, depending on the bonds inside the fund. The bond portion is not there to make you feel excited. It is there to reduce the risk that a stock market crash forces you to sell growth assets at the worst possible time. In the example, broad bond market indexes have averaged around 4% annually. On $1 million, that would be about $40,000 per year. Third, put $500,000 into residential real estate and another $500,000 into commercial real estate. Residential real estate might include single-family homes. Commercial real estate might include warehouses or other income-producing properties. The logic is that residential property can provide appreciation and rental demand, while commercial property can provide longer tenant relationships and cash flow if purchased correctly. In the source example, residential real estate is said to have historically grown around 7% annually, which on $500,000 would be about $35,000 per year. Commercial real estate is described as potentially producing around 8% annually, or $40,000 per year on $500,000. But real estate returns are never automatic. A property can be overpaid for. Tenants can leave, repairs can be larger than expected, financing can become expensive, property taxes can rise, insurance can rise, a commercial tenant can fail, a residential tenant can stop paying. So the return number is less important than the underwriting. Do the rents support the price? Are the expenses realistic? Is the property in a durable location? Is there leverage? What happens if vacancy rises? What happens if rates rise? What happens if you need liquidity? Real estate can be excellent, but it must be treated as a business, not a trophy. Fourth, put $500,000 into blue chip crypto such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. This is the most volatile part of the example. Bitcoin has been one of the strongest performing assets of the last decade, but it has also had brutal drawdowns. It can go down fast, it can go up fast. It is not stable income. It is a speculative, asymmetric allocation. The source example treats it as a 5 to 10% moonshot allocation, not as the foundation of the portfolio. That distinction is critical. A moonshot allocation can exist inside a strong portfolio. It should not become the entire portfolio. If it succeeds, it can help. If it fails, it should not destroy the plan. In the example, past explosive gains are normalized to a hypothetical 10 to 15% range, producing about $62,500 per year on $500,000 at the midpoint. But again, that is not guaranteed. Crypto can do much better or much worse. If you own it, you must size it so that volatility does not force emotional decisions. Fifth, put $1 million into a high-interest savings account. This part is about liquidity and stability. It gives you accessible cash, it gives you a buffer. It reduces the pressure to sell investments during downturns. In the example, a high-interest savings account at 4.5% on $1 million would generate about $45,000 per year. But rates change. A 4.5% savings rate today can be 2% later. Cash is useful, but cash is not a permanent income engine unless rates remain high. If you combine the example assumptions, the portfolio could generate around $312,500 per year if markets perform in line with those assumptions. That sounds attractive, but the most important part is not the number. The most important part is the principle of diversification. The portfolio is not one bet. It has stocks for growth, bonds for stability, real estate for hard asset exposure, crypto for optional upside, and cash for liquidity. Each piece plays a role. The mistake is believing that any one piece is enough. All stocks can be too volatile. All bonds can be too vulnerable to inflation and rate changes. All real estate can be illiquid. All crypto can be catastrophic if sized incorrectly. All cash can lose purchasing power. A good portfolio is not a collection of exciting ideas. It is a balanced system where different assets are designed to behave differently under different conditions. That is what most people miss. They ask, what should I buy? The better question is, what role does this asset play in the system? If you cannot answer that question, you probably should not own it. In the example, $500,000 is left as fun money. I understand the reasoning when wealth arrives suddenly. You should not pretend you will never enjoy any of it. If you try to be perfectly disciplined while ignoring human nature, you may rebel against your own plan. So setting aside a defined amount for enjoyment can be reasonable, but the key word is defined. Fun money must be inside the plan, not a leak outside the plan. If you decide that 10% is for enjoyment and 90% is protected, you have created a boundary. The danger comes when every purchase feels like it is just a small exception. A small exception repeated often becomes a large destruction. That is how fortunes disappear. The deeper lesson is that money is not really about Lamborghinis or mansions. It is about not having to do things you do not want to do. Real wealth is waking up and deciding how to spend your day. It is controlling your time. It is being able to say no. It is not being trapped by someone else's schedule, someone else's approval, or someone else's emergency. Most people who blow sudden wealth are not buying freedom. They are buying symbols. Symbols are expensive, Freedom is usually quieter. A bigger house may bring higher taxes, higher insurance, higher maintenance, more staff, more attention, more complexity, and less flexibility. A sports car may bring pleasure, but it also brings depreciation insurance, attention, and a desire for the next symbol. Private school may be wonderful if it is sustainable, but dangerous if it turns into a lifestyle commitment that depends on capital you should not be spending. This is how spending becomes a trap. The first purchase is not the problem. The new baseline is the problem. Once you raise your lifestyle, it becomes emotionally difficult to lower it. That is why people who suddenly become rich often become suddenly poor. They increase fixed costs before they build permanent income. That is backwards. Build the income first, then decide what lifestyle that income can safely support. This is the order that matters. Capital first, income second, lifestyle third. Most people reverse it. Lifestyle first, income assumed, capital destroyed. Then the system collapses. If you suddenly become rich, you must also think beyond yourself. Once you have privacy, legal structure, debt control, relationship boundaries, principal protection, a freedom figure, and an investment system, then you can think about legacy. Legacy does not only mean giving money away, it means deciding what your wealth is for. Do you want to support your children without weakening them? Do you want to give to causes without becoming a public target? Do you want to create educational opportunities? Do you want to protect your spouse? Do you want to create a structure that prevents heirs from fighting? Do you want to make sure the money lasts longer than your excitement? These are governance questions. Families that preserve wealth usually have governance. Families that lose wealth often have emotion without governance. Governance means rules. Who controls the money? When can it be distributed? For what purposes? Who advises the family? How are taxes handled? How are disputes resolved? What happens if someone becomes irresponsible? What happens if someone marries poorly? What happens if someone is sued? What happens if someone develops an addiction? These questions are uncomfortable. That is why they are important. Money does not remove human problems. It often gives human problems more room to grow. So you need structure before the problems become visible. The central lesson is this: sudden wealth requires immediate humility. You have to admit that you may not be ready. That is not weakness. That is intelligence. The person who suddenly receives money and says, "I know exactly what to do," is dangerous. The person who says, "I need principles, time, and competent advice," has a chance. The first 6 months should be boring. No public announcement, no lifestyle explosion, no large gifts, no random businesses, no emotional investments, no informal loans, no public displays, no rushing. Instead, the first 6 months should be about building the machine, legal structure, tax planning, debt cleanup, banking organization, privacy protection, investment policy, family boundaries, liquidity planning, personal routine. That may sound less exciting than buying a mansion. That is the point. Excitement is often the enemy of durable wealth. If you want to keep the money, you have to become the kind of person who can manage the money. And that means changing your relationship with attention. Most people want others to know they have won. That desire is expensive. If you need applause, you will pay for it with privacy. If you need status, you will pay for it with flexibility. If you need to prove people wrong, you will pay for it with bad purchases. If you need to rescue everyone, you will pay for it with your own stability. The best move is often the move nobody sees. That is how serious wealth behaves. It does not need to shout. It needs to endure. The same principle applies to investing the money. Do not try to prove you are smart. Try to avoid being stupid. Do not chase the highest return. Build the highest probability system. Do not confuse past performance with destiny. Do not confuse liquidity with safety. Do not confuse secrecy with shame. Do not confuse generosity with lack of boundaries. Do not confuse spending with freedom. Do not confuse principle with income. If you understand those distinctions, your chances improve dramatically. The reason suddenly rich people often fail is not that the money was insufficient. It is that the system around the money was insufficient. They lacked privacy, so the world entered. They lacked legal structure, so claims multiplied. They lacked purpose, so boredom took over. They lacked debt discipline, so liabilities remained. They lacked boundaries, so relationships became financial negotiations. They lacked investment principles, so principle became spending money. They lacked patience, so emotion drove decisions. These are solvable problems, but they must be solved early. Once the money is gone, wisdom arrives too late. I think about sudden wealth the way I think about a fragile windfall in a changing economic system. The first job is not maximizing upside. The first job is preventing ruin. Ruin can come from markets, it can come from taxes, it can come from lawsuits, it can come from divorce, it can come from relatives, it can come from addiction, it can come from boredom, it can come from ego, it can come from not knowing what you do not know. Therefore, your first principle is survival. After survival comes preservation, after preservation comes income, after income comes growth, after growth comes legacy. That order matters. If you skip survival and rush into growth, you may lose everything. If you skip preservation and rush into lifestyle, the principle disappears. If you skip income and spend from capital, the machine dies. If you skip legacy, the next generation may inherit money without principles and repeat the cycle. So when you get rich, do not tell everyone. Tell the right professionals, build the structure, stay quiet. Let time pass, pay off high-interest debt, do not lend to friends and family. Give only within clear boundaries. Calculate your freedom figure, invest the principal. Spend only the income. Keep work or purpose in your life. Avoid ego decisions. Use money to buy time, not attention. And remember that the real victory is not becoming rich suddenly. The real victory is still being rich years later with your relationships intact, your mind clear, your freedom expanded, and your wealth structured to survive you. That is the difference between a windfall and a fortune. A windfall is something that happens to you. A fortune is something you build, protect, and govern. If sudden wealth comes into your life, treat it like a powerful machine. Do not stand in front of it emotionally. Do not let others grab the controls. Do not run it at full speed before you understand how it works. Slow it down, study it, build guardrails around it, then use it to create the one thing money is truly good for: freedom. With responsibility, that is the outcome worth protecting.